Hi everybody, Ian Bremmer here, and a quick take to kick off your week. We're almost 2 months now into the Iran war. We have a ceasefire that is still holding, just the United States with a blockade on Iran. The Iranians in return continuing to prevent ships from passing through the strait. It's very much as we've seen over the past many weeks of the war, with the exception of the fact that the Americans and the Iranians aren't shooting at each other, and that is a big deal. So the big question is, do we see an extension of the ceasefire? Do talks actually go ahead in Islamabad? Vice President Vance, the White House has been saying they're going to send them all weekend long, now delayed for a day. We'll see where this ends up going. My expectation is that the talks do go ahead, that the Iranians back down. They have said that if there is no end to the U.S. blockade, that they won't persist with talks. I think that is a feint. It's bluster. It's not true. Remember, at the beginning of the first round of talks in Islamabad, the Iranians said that if the United States did not broker a Lebanon-Israel ceasefire, that they wouldn't start talks in Islamabad. Turned out that wasn't the case. They still engaged. And eventually, a brief 10-day ceasefire was announced that Trump brokered between the Israelis and Lebanon. Hezbollah not a part of that. Very shaky ceasefire, could easily break down if talks in Islamabad don't go well. But for now, they have that. For now, the Iranians, I believe, are very willing to continue to talk and continue to extend talks, because as long as a ceasefire is ongoing, they're in better shape. Why? Because they can dig out military capabilities that are under a lot of rubble, their launch pads, their missile stockpiles, and that gives them more ability to threaten the United States, Gulf allies in the region, if we see hostilities begin again. I'm quite optimistic that we will get to yes. What I mean by that is that Trump will get an additional round of talks, and that he is at some point, maybe this week or maybe soon after, announce some kind of breakthrough with the Iranians. He is very, very inclined to find an off-ramp to the war. He knows it's unpopular. He knows that absent a continued ceasefire, the Iranians can stop shipping from going through, irrespective of any U.S. military plan. And he also knows that getting troops on the ground is extremely unpopular, even for his own MAGA supporters, who so far, a majority of whom have stuck with him on the war. That's one of the reasons why he's been slowing down the expeditionary forces, some of whom have not even gone through the Strait of Malacca, one of the strike carrier groups, which he sent the long way around the Cape of Good Hope. This has not been we need to get the military in place as soon as possible so that we can order ground forces against the Iranians and take the oil, or if they don't move ahead with a yes. This is we don't want to escalate. We're going to continue to bluster. We'll continue to tell the Iranians we're going to blow up all their infrastructure. But in reality, we really want to find an off-ramp. And that's what's behind now the fifth time that Trump has threatened to blow up all of Iran's civilian infrastructure and military infrastructure if they don't engage with a deal with the United States. I don't think that's very credible. I don't think the Iranians think that's very credible, which is the more relevant point. So we've got two sides here, which are both engaging in a lot of bluster, that both have real leverage over the other. The American leverage is now stopping from the Iranians from being able to make money, which they made an awful lot of in the first weeks of the war. The Iranian leverage is the ability to cause significant and ongoing economic pain for the U.S. and for pretty much everyone else. And ultimately, the Iranian leverage is a lot more consequential because they have so much less to lose. the big question that the market should have and the rest is that assuming that you get an announcement of yes, that there's a deal, does the deal actually get implemented? And this is where I'm really much more skeptical. I worry that the Iranians, particularly the IRGC in Tehran, are very different, both internally, not in full agreement with each other on all issues. The supreme leader is focused on vengeance and is not necessarily just thinking about how to get to a deal with the Americans. Very different than the foreign minister, the speaker of the parliament, that have been traveling and meeting with the Americans. And plus, even if there's full alignment, and there isn't, a willingness to just extend and pretend in these talks is clearly in their interests. Extend and actually implement, very different story. On the American side, you have Trump, who is going to make announcements that won't align fully with what the Iranians agree with. He'll exaggerate. We see this happen all the time. It happened with Trump and Modi around the trade negotiations, and derailed and slowed those down for months and months. And this is much more consequential, and Trump is much more incented to say things that are an over-optimistic view from what the Iranians necessarily agreed to even on the ground. Again, he does it all the time, but it makes it much easier for any given deal to fall apart. And then plus, you've got the IAEA, the arms inspectors, nuclear inspectors, who would be critical for any agreement on enrichment and for the removal of enriched uranium stockpiles, and yet they have not been involved in these talks at all to date. They would need to be involved. They'd need to be implementing on the ground, and no one really trusts them. And that's even before you get to the potential of the Houthis causing problems, a group that wouldn't want a ceasefire because they would lose their ability to leverage protection money from the Saudis and from others. It also is before we think about Israel and their interest in continuing the war inside Lebanon when Hezbollah is still not disarmed, their interest in furthering a war in Iran with a regime that's still in place and with military capabilities that are still in place. So all of this is to say that as much as it is fully within Trump's capacity to announce that the war is over, that the Americans have ended fighting, that is very different from implementing a deal that opens the strait, implementing a deal that leads to a more stable Middle East. There, I think we're very, very far from an agreement. I fear that the ebullience that will come if we have a second round of talks, which I think is likely, and we have what looks like progress, which I also think is likely, especially assuming Vice President Vance actually goes, that's not where we actually are heading. So I hate to be a bit of a downer on a Monday, would love to be wrong about this and actually see a successful conclusion of negotiations that get us to starting to rebuild all the damage and getting those supply chains all working again and getting the global economy running the way it should. We will see in the coming days and weeks. That's it for me. Talk to you all real soon.